Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you may be, anywhere across the world. Thanks so much for joining us live here today for Serverless Office Hours, streaming on AWS Twitch channel and the Serverless Land YouTube channel and on LinkedIn Live. My name is Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate as part of the Serverless team at AWS, and I'm super duper happy to be able to be joined by a software guru, Oluwaseun Ademuwagun, who we're going to introduce a little bit later, but he is part of AWS scheduling and we're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. Seun, how are you doing today?
Great, great, great. I don't know about software guru, but great.
Excellent. Yeah. We'll see about that. You'll see once he starts showing you all the cool stuff, how many awesome things are going on. Well, just before we get to all the cool stuff that we're going to be talking about today, let's just have a recap of what's been going in the world of AWS Serverless over the past week. Last week we had a really cool show, new service, Amazon MSK Serverless. So if you're using Kafka, this is a really good way that Usama Nassim showed how you can scale up your Kafka clusters and just make it far more simpler to be able to connect things. So if you are a Kafka user, a really good service to be able to look at. In terms of what's new at AWS Service, well, the ramp up to reInvent is happening as crazy as can be. I'll just pause the top two, but the Lambda one further down, a new telemetry API for Lambda. So if you've ever used Lambda extensions for third-party observability tools, much easier way that you can get telemetry data now out of Lambda. Before, with the logs API, it was just logs which you could send to custom destinations. Now it's also telemetry and metrics as well, traces and metrics as well. So really sort of rounds all that capabilities. It means if you're using a whole bunch of third-party tools to augment what Lambda can do, this makes it much simpler. A whole bunch of SNS just gets bigger, better, faster, and more. So filter policies just get so much huger. The thing we are going to be talking about today is the new amazing EventBridge new scheduler. But the EventBridge team hasn't been resting on their laurels by a day or two as well, and they came out recently also with some enhanced filtering capabilities. So this is sort of suffix searching and not matching and all this kind of things. Really just more capabilities when you're building event-driven applications to be able to do even more with EventBridge. We've got some compute blog posts that have come out over the past week to support a lot of these. The second one from the top, all about the telemetry API. The third one down from Ben Moses, enriching operational events with serverless. So this is a really good way where you've got operational events coming, managing EC2 instances or things like that. Yeah, we do manage servers with serverless as well. This is a way that he's got a really good blog post for being able to add more information onto that and then using that in downstream resources with, of course, EventBridge as well. And then top of the pile, which literally came out about an hour ago, Suresh and Seb have a really cool blog post. And this is AWS SAM, which is our serverless application model. Well, that comes in two parts. One is being able to build the serverless applications, and one is the CLI. And that is now integrated with HashiCorp Terraform. So if you build serverless applications with HashiCorp Terraform, you can now locally invoke those Lambda functions to use that for fast testing. So how cool is that? SAM and HashiCorp are coming together to do some really cool stuff. Of course, by nearly 2 weeks' time, we're going to be in the throngs of reInvent. So this is happening in Las Vegas, USA, between the 28th of November and December the 2nd. I will be there with a whole bunch of colleagues, hopefully being able to show you all the cool things we've been doing in AWS land with all the different services. There's going to be breakout sessions and chalk talks and everything. There are a whole bunch of repeat sessions which have actually been released recently. So if some of the sessions were bagged already and you were on the waiting list, go and have a look again, because you're going to be able to sign up for some of those. I've actually got two sessions which are being repeated. One is a real deep dive into how Lambda works under the hood. That's SVS 404, a deeper look under AWS Lambda. That's now got a repeat on Tuesday evening. And also, I've got a best practices for advanced serverless developers, and that's SVS 401, and that is also being repeated. I believe the repeat's on a Monday or a Wednesday. Anyway, it's on Monday and Wednesday, one of the two. So check that out if you are still looking for seats for that, and have a look at the content catalog, because there are repeats for lots of services. So if you didn't manage to get the first seats, that's all you can have that. Remember, lots of the stuff is recorded as well. So if you're not able to join us in person, we will miss you, obviously. But you'll be able to interact virtually via the reInvent platform. And yeah, it'll be cool to be part of at least a lot of what reInvent is going on, even if you're not able to be there. So Sion is here to talk about the cool stuff with EventBridge Scheduler. But Sion, you've been at AWS for a while. You are, in my mind at least, the guru software developer. So yeah, what is your journey to be able to launch EventBridge Scheduler, which is a whole new cool thing?
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. So I've been at AWS for 9 years now. But it's been a
So in
fun journey.
AWS, yes, that's 9 years, but in real life, is that, I don't know, like 60, 70 or something? Maybe 20, 30.
Yeah, maybe 2030, maybe 2030. Yeah, yeah. I had dyed my hair, so you can't see the gray hair. But yeah.
I was going to ask.
But yeah, we've been working on this for about a year, kind of get this out to customers. I think we've been working backwards, looking at the different requests that customers have had about this in terms of scheduled rules, and decided to kind of think bigger. We also have the interesting thing is also we have internal scheduling capabilities here that existed in AWS that was powering scheduled rules. We decided to kind of take some of that functionality and extract it to expose to customers, and we'll be talking about that today. So yeah, super excited.
Well, that's one of the sort of interesting points just to tease out that a lot of people think, oh, in AWS you must have all of these sort of amazing, weird and wonderful tools that nobody can get access to. And we do have some tools that are particular to AWS that we use internally, but a hell of a lot of AWS is actually built on AWS. And so it's interesting that even, Lambda and EventBridge and step functions and, obviously all the serverless services, a lot of other services use that. And some of that, comes out in public, like when we do S3 object Lambda. So as you pull something from S3 that can run a Lambda function to do something, well, that just by the name S3 object Lambda, that that is using Lambda under the hood. But yeah, there are a whole bunch of other services which are doing a whole bunch of things with a whole bunch of other AWS services. So yes, we rarely use our own stuff internally. And then when we do have cool capabilities like have an internal scheduler, there's always talk and always work to try and see if we can externalize these as much as possible. Yeah. So you can also get your hands on the cool goodies that we use. So yeah, also remember we are live. This is Serverless Office Hours Live. So please send us your questions and your comments, and we'll be happy to look at them. Ryan, love you, man. Thanks for joining us. Sam and Terraform looks great, really great. Also, a shout out to Anton Babenko, who's an AWS serverless hero, and certainly a hero when it comes to all things to do with Terraform, and he's been heavily involved in getting us this across the line. So it's always great to have our AWS serverless heroes also involved. Yeah, any questions or comments, send them in the chat, and we'll be able to address them as we go along. But Ian, I know you had some things you wanted to tee up and talk about EventBridge Scheduler. Can I bring up your slides? You ready for that?
Yeah.
Cool, there we go.
Hi, so I'll do another intro. My name is Sean. You can just call me Sean, not the whole thing, for everybody that has a question. So Sean Adimowagun. I'm a software development manager for AWS Scheduler, and we'll be going over the new service, Amazon EventBridge Scheduler. But before we actually go over and talk about the cool things that we have in Amazon EventBridge Scheduler, I would actually go over the existing functionality or the event functionality we had scheduling-wise prior to the existence of the service, so we can kind of compare and contrast. And what we had primarily was EventBridge rules. So customers prior to EventBridge Scheduler, probably most customers today that need to schedule things on AWS, we use a rule. And you can use a rule to schedule. You can use a rule outside schedules to have things fire based on an event. So an event being like an S3 bucket getting deleted. Sorry, you could basically have something fire. You could have a Lambda function act based on that event. But in addition to that, you could have scheduled events where you have certain things that you want to run every day at 5 a.m. or every 5 minutes, and you set a schedule rule and have a target for that schedule rule. The target could be a Lambda function, could be an SQS queue, where you have a message sent to that queue, or an SNS topic. But there were certain limitations with this functionality, and we'll kind of discuss that in the next slide. So the certain limitations with this functionality where, first of all, the rule was you could only define things that are recurring. You couldn't define things that would fire at a specific time in the future, which is a really cool thing I'm excited about that we'll kind of talk about in future slides. And you could define schedules in a fixed rate, so every 5 minutes, every hour, every day, or a cron expression. So depending on cron expression, not usually the most customer-friendly way of defining cron. Cron, a lot of customers don't understand cron specifically, but it's actually the most common way of defining recurring schedules. Other limitations where you could only have schedules defined on a default EventBridge bus. And probably one of the biggest ones is basically the limit on the number of rules you could have. We had a soft limit of 300, and I think the hard limit was 2,000. And customers that wanted to schedule hundreds of thousands of scheduled events kind of hit this wall, and they either had to create multiple accounts or figure out workarounds or build custom solutions to work around this limitation. And a big ask was time zone support. Actually, probably one of the biggest asks, probably even bigger than the number of rules was basically like, I want people to specify my time zone. I want my time zone to be like, I don't know, Los Angeles, Los Angeles time zone, or a time zone in another part of the world, Australia, Sydney, the time zone for Sydney. You want to be able to set that because nobody wants to do any special calculation using UTC. And in addition to time zone support, they want daylight savings like adjustments too as well. So that was kind of one of, I think the number of rules and the time zone support were kind of the big ones that we got kind of from customers. In addition to that, we kind of got requests for customers also wanted more targets in addition to this. And so we kind of took a step back and we decided, what are the categories of use cases that kind of these customers that want more limits? What are the categories of use cases that they have or they're trying to solve? And I think two big categories here. I think the last two are kind of lumped into one. Two big categories here. The first one is basically IT process automation. So we have like a schedule report, or I want to kind of schedule things to kind of start and stop certain instances, or make operations on my database periodically. And I want something to kind of manage that. You typically would have multiple teams in the company that would have all these disparate like IT processes they want to automate. And they want a central place to basically schedule these things, manage them, whether to stop a schedule or start a schedule or create a schedule. They want a central place to manage this across maybe a couple hundred, thousands, but kind of hitting that wall, they want to kind of go above the number of scheduled roles. And they also want the flexibility of times and support. A bigger use case is customers actually have scheduling, or say a higher throughput use case is customers that actually want they want scheduling baked into the application. So I'm creating a reminder app, and my backend needs to kind of deal with scheduling because my customers are setting reminders for something to fire a specific time in the future on a recurring basis, and they want something to kind of store this functionality for them because they don't want to build something custom, and that's what AWS is for. AWS is around, we want to keep abstracting custom logic, so eventually you don't need to write any logic. That's our asymptotic goal. It's gonna get there where you don't have to write any logic. And this is kind of a big category here. As customers writing applications, they want to abstract the scheduling functionality in there. Reminders is one. You could even have a use case for one-time schedules where you want to have a customer signs up for the service and you want certain things to happen a day, an hour, a couple of minutes after the customer signs up or performs an action. Maybe the customer signs up, you want to kind of send a reminder like, hey, you should start shopping on our website. Maybe an hour after the sign up or 25 minutes after the sign up. And you want to trigger this one-time schedules. Now, prior to the existence of EventBridge Scheduler, you have to build something custom for this because of the level of throughput that you would need. You would very easily hit that 300 rule wall if you had this kind of logic built into application. And the other one, which is kind of closely related to the data plane scheduling, is you have a large company organization and they have multiple teams scattered around the world. They want to have a central place to manage all their schedules as well. And building logic for that, kind of similar to IT process automation and data plane, they want to kind of have a central pane of glass to view all their schedules across the company. They also want to have like ways to kind of manage security in terms of like, I don't want this team to be able to modify this other team's schedules and things like that, which will actually kind of go into with EventBridge Scheduler. You can do that with something called schedule groups. So these three categories of use cases, we kind of took a step back in our working backwards process and we say, okay, these are kind of three use cases that we're kind of seeing from a pattern standpoint from customers that want to either have time zone support or customers that want to have higher number of rules or scheduled rules. And we decided to come up with EventBridge Scheduler, which is serverless scheduler that allows you to kind of create, initially, the soft limit we have is 1 million schedules. You can create 1 million schedules. And in addition to creating 1 million schedules, we decided Step Functions has this really cool thing called AWS SDK integrations that is very popular and a lot of customers love. We should have that for EventBridge Scheduler as well. So in addition to being able to create 1 million schedules, you can also have this 1 million schedules hit over 200,000, over 200 AWS services. I believe it's over 270 AWS services and over 6,000 API actions. So,
wow, that is huge. I mean, that's literally one of the, I used to say unsung heroes of step functions, but I think people are cottoning on how important that is, where step functions just integrates, basically it's the AWS SDK under the hood, 6,000 different actions you're going to do. So think of, reading and writing from DynamoDB, creating networking stuff, doing, machine learning things, all this kind of stuff. And that is now available as part, you could do a scheduled action for that. And, we'll have a soft limit of 1 million that you can set up. I think that is just cloud scale. I love it.
Yeah. And one of the most interesting use cases we've seen so far from customers in our short lifetime is fault injection service. Actually, especially customer kind of trying to inject faults on a schedule. Different AWS services that you could use and different AWS actions, stop with starter database, delete a cluster, whatever you want to do, obviously safely, you can kind of do on a schedule.
The Chaos Monkey Scheduler. I love it.
Yeah, Chaos Monkey Scheduler. And essentially, this is kind of the new state of scheduling. And the recommended way of scheduling now is to use EventBridge Scheduler. You create a schedule, you don't need a boss, you set a target, and actually one thing I didn't call out in the previous slide is you can customize the payload. That's actually another gap from scheduled rules is kind of being able to customize the payload. There's some cool things you can actually do when customizing the payload. We support this, what we call context attributes. They're basically special variables where you could in addition to having your custom part of the payload, you could set certain keywords to say, I want to have the payload include the scheduled time. So I actually know the scheduled time for this delivery was maybe 5 a.m. So I can actually see that in the actual message if I'm sending something to SQS. So you can actually set custom attributes. You could also have like an execution ID if you want to use that as an identifier to deduplicate information that's coming through if you have duplicates, for example. So you can customize and set the payload for whatever is going to your target, whatever input is going to your target. I think our limit for payload size is 256 KB. So that should be hopefully more than enough for a lot of use cases. And once you can configure it, you can do other things. You could modify the schedule after you've created it. So you have a one-time schedule and you're like, oops, this was supposed to fire at 5 a.m. tomorrow, but I don't want it to fire anymore. You could disable it. In addition to that, you could update the time because I want to shift it forward or bring it back in. Same thing with recurring schedules. You can also update them. You can update them. You could update the start and end date. So we're kind of going. I'll have a demo at the end where I'll kind of go through the console and kind of show the different things you can kind of do with EventBridge Scheduler. So the features I kind of talked about.
So yeah, we just have a question or comment that's come in from Sundar. Yeah, thanks Sundar for joining us on YouTube. You have a use case that calls for reading from a database at regular intervals and to perform some business logic on that data. The application is deployed as a collection of microservices in EKS. So I mean, yeah, this isn't a Lambda specific thing. Anything at a schedule, EventBridge Scheduler could do.
Yeah, I mean, but it looks like in this case here that Sundar mentioned, it looks like there are multiple steps to it. So it looks like there are multiple steps to it, and I think for scheduler we just invoke a single target. So we could. And
it also depends what database you're using as well. If that's just a direct SDK integration, if you're using something like RDS or something where you have a particular SQL query you need to run, that's not going to use the SDK integration, but you are going to be able to invoke these schedules from various kind of things. So yeah, I think Sion, your point is correct. There are a few things you may need to connect together to do this.
Yeah, and you could maybe have a schedule, invoke your EKS, whatever, directly, or invoke a Lambda, or invoke step functions, or invoke the database directly.
Cool.
Yeah, and talking about, I think we kind of briefly touched about this. So cron and fixed rates, which scheduled rules had before, we have support for that. And one-time schedules, you want them to fire a specific time in the future. One feature that it looks like we're getting a lot of like interesting reception from customers, actually even more than expected, was time windows. Where you could basically say, I want something to, I don't need this thing to fire at a specified time. I'm flexible. So I could say this thing is supposed to fire every day at 1 p.m., but I set a flexible time window of like 2 hours. So meaning between 1 to 3 o'clock, it should fire. Use case benefits of doing this is you could be trying to protect a downstream target. So maybe you have a single database that everything hits and you want to kind of spread the load a bit. You could set a time window for that. That's probably one of the bigger use cases for kind of having a flexible time window. Or you don't really care too much about when it fires and you're trying to protect some kind of downstream targets. You would use a time window for something like that. What we do is we randomly pick a time within the time window to set as the actual time we actually invoke your target, and that should kind of smoothen the traffic around. We're open to feedback in terms of how much control customers want in how time window works. So definitely looking for some feedback here. In addition to that, we talked about being able to set a time zone. You can also set a start and end date. In addition, we talked about payload support. The big one also is the retry policy, which EventBridge Scheduler also has. You could set a retry policy for I want to keep retrying delivery for this target up to a certain point in time, maximum 124 hours, 1 day. And a big thing also is the DLQ. So DLQ is kind of the primary way of detecting when something is wrong. So our recommendation is you should probably always have a DLQ for your schedules, especially for production schedules. You want to make sure you have a DLQ so that if anything goes wrong, either the target is misconfigured or the error stopping the target because of 500s or 400s, you want things end up in the DLQ so you know why things are failing. In addition, we also have metrics as well, but your DLQ message would show the precise error message for why a specific schedule failed. So you could use monitoring from CloudWatch and DLQ to kind of diagnose and debug things when they fail. So this is kind of a comparison of the two services, what we have the schedule rules and what we're kind of extending with EventBridge Scheduler. I kind of talked about like the time window support. A big one is schedule groups. And I'll kind of do a demo on schedule groups. Schedule groups, essentially, it's a way to organize your schedules. You can apply tags to a group, and that way you could basically have tag-based access control. So if I set a tag on a specific schedule group, and I want to have like only specific teams only having access to this and that schedule group, like maybe a specific team should have access to this schedule group and another team should have access to the other schedule group. You could set tags and use tag-based access control to minimize access that way. And it's also a very good way to organize certain schedules because you can view things for all the schedules in a specific schedule group without seeing the other schedules. And as I said, different ways we have time zone support, and these are the different ways of specifying your cron, your rate, about every 5 minutes, and your one-time schedules, which you want to set in the future. You set them in the past, they just fire now.
Okay.
And I'll kind of move on to our scheduling demo.
Shall I switch over to the other tab?
Yeah. So this is the EventBridge console. Now, if you go to the console, you see a special section for scheduler. If you actually go to the top, you can actually go directly to the scheduler from just here. And over here, we kind of have a high-level description of what the scheduler is and the different components. We have templated targets and universal targets. So universal targets is the SDK integration I talked about earlier. Templated targets, we kind of have a simplified experience for setting targets. So you don't have to like specify all the fields like you would use in the USI. The experience is a bit simpler. You just specify the RN for those targets and the input. So for SQS, SNS, Lambda, EventBridge, those targets, our most common targets, you could just basically have a much simpler experience for them. For SQS, it's send message. For SNS, it's send notification. And Lambda is invoke. So we're going to go ahead with creating a schedule. Simple in this case here. I'm very creative with my names.
Soon, do you mind if we just zoom in a little bit, just in case, so we can...
Is better?
Yeah, that's cool.
From creating a schedule, some tests. By default, you have a default schedule group that all your schedules by default are included in. I said default a lot. You have a recurring schedule. I'm going to go with the recurring schedule. So let's say this is running every 2 minutes. I'll set the flexible time window to off so that we actually have things firing quicker and we can see the demo. Time zone, you can set any time zone you want, but I'm just going to stick with the local time so you can see, you could set up, any of the times you want. But let's stick with Vancouver. If you go back, you could also specify the start and end date for when you want this, to start and end. And as I said, these are the templated targets, and these are the SDK integrations. Well, actually, I'll walk you through both use cases. And for this, I'll use SQS because SQS is easy to see the payload you're getting in the queue. But you can use step functions. As you can see, the simplified experiences, you just put the state machine name, and you just have the input. So this is for the templated targets. ECS as well is one of them. This is ECS, you can specify the cluster, the task definition.
Wow, I love that. that just, so you're not sort of having to wrangle a whole bunch of SDK JSON to get it into the format of the destination you need. the EventBridge scheduler is doing that for you.
Yeah, so this is for a subset of our targets. You have this kind of very simplified experience where you just specify only specific inputs and we take care of the rest for you. And then we have complete coverage for the others. So let's use SQS here. I'm gonna see which queue. Let's see, schedule a test. I spoke earlier about specific variables, so I'm going to actually use them here. Specific variables, keywords here, you could have the schedule iron in your payload, so you actually know the schedule, and the schedule time, and an execution ID, which is basically just the UID, unique ID for that execution attempt, and an attempt number. So if we try to deliver something multiple times, you can kind of use this to actually understand like this was delivered multiple times.
So that's even useful for idempotency or something. If this does a retry or something, you'd be able to use the actual execution ID to do some conditional write for Dynamo or something like that to make sure you can handle idempotency, which is always good in event-driven architectures.
Yeah. And the other things are just more informational. But yes, this one is kind of an idempotency ID. So you have this, move over here. By default, schedules enabled. You could set your schedule to disabled, meaning it won't fire. Well, let's keep this enabled. Say retry policy. You want to keep an eye on this one. You want to make sure you set it to something that you find you don't want it to be too excessive. If you have something that urgent and you want to actually have things end up in a DLQ fast, you might want to make this a bit lower. So let's even say let's make this 1 hour. I want to get that feedback loop. And if I DLQ in this account, let's do this. And for our predefined or templated targets, we support creating a new role for this target. So you have the one-click role creation, so you don't have to go to the console or IAM and do all that. So this, create a schedule. It says 1 out of 12 steps, but it's a lot faster than that indicates. Let's see.
But then a lot of this, I suppose, I mean, you're walking it through the console, but a lot of use cases would be companies who want to do this en masse. This would all be done via API action. And, even thinking of a sort of SaaS company or something who would then be, setting this up. As you mentioned, the use case having, a scheduled task for all of their customers to send an email reminder a week after they've signed up or something like that. That would all be done sort of en masse via the API action.
So this is a scheduler created. So I think it should take a couple of minutes for the schedule to kind of get to the target. But while we wait there, I can kind of walk through the schedule group use case. So schedule group, just think about it kind of like as a SD bucket folder, or where you just collect different groups of schedules. By default, everything goes to that default schedule group that automatically exists for you, and you can apply tags. So let's say this is environment. Prod is your tag. Team, scheduler team. And get the schedule group. And when you're creating a schedule, specify that group now. So, and things are in there. And everything you want to use for tag-based access control is essentially there. So in this time around, let's create a one-time schedule. But actually, let's make that today because we do want to find out. So let's see, 135. 5 minutes. Also, this here. Actually, let's use this. Let's use the SDK integration. So I'm going to pick purge queue because that should be easy to see. So you have here, this is the SDK integration. So I have to get a queue URL.
So you can use the groups as well, I suppose, via the API action to say, get all get the query group and get all the schedules within that. So I suppose for even a SaaS company use case, you could even have a tag per customer maybe, and then if you want to delete all the rules for a particular customer if they unfortunately leave your service or transition, that'd be an easy way to manage this at scale.
Yep. And you can set tags, and all the schedules under that group will automatically have tag-based access control, right? So you can restrict access to say, okay, all the schedules in this. So here, let's see. I think it's a purge role I created. So for we're obviously looking to make the experience for the SDK integrations better, but for the SDK integrations, you will have to kind of create like a role and use the existing role for the SDK integration. So have something pre-created that has purge access. So you'd have to make sure that the role has permissions to the API that you want the EventBridge Scheduler to call, and you also need to make sure your class policy has scheduler. So scheduler has permissions. We have documentation in our user guide on what permissions to set. So I think we'll be sharing that if that's not already shared in this office hours. I have this. So it's going to create a one-time schedule. I'm creating a one-time schedule just so everybody's seeing this, use this clearly. I'm creating a one-time schedule in the schedule group, and that one-time schedule is going to purge this queue. So let's go to SQS and I'll show the queue. So this is the DLQ. This is the queue to be purged. You see it has 5 messages, so we should check back in about 3 minutes to see if there's anything. It should be down to 0 in 3-4 minutes. And this is the queue that we already had. So poll for messages. So you can see this was the ARN, this is the time, this is the ID, the attempt number. Same thing for this. ARN, time, ID, number. Time, ID, number. Yeah. So this is one example with recurring schedules. I think we still have to see the one-time schedule, which would purge this in about 2 minutes.
Well, just while the 2 minutes is whirring by, Sudhakar, thanks for joining us via YouTube. A few interesting questions coming from you. Are the schedule events delivered exactly once or at least once?
At least once.
Okay. So hence, sort of being able to handle the idempotency thing is quite important. But to be honest, if you're building any event-driven architectures or event-driven applications where you've got producers and consumers, idempotency is, I think, something you should be looking at right from the very beginning, just to be able to handle that in your destination. Whatever kind of service that is. If it's putting something on SQS, you've obviously got some other process that is then pulling things from SQS, and you can and then you can sort of handle that idempotency at that kind of level. Another one of your questions about X-Ray integration is does the scheduler integrated with X-Ray like the way EventBridge is currently integrated?
So currently we're not integrated with X-Ray, and that's something that we will be looking to see how we can make that better for customers. I think there are 2 things we're looking at from like a visibility standpoint. I think one of them is logging, exposing more logs to customers in addition to the DLQ. X-Ray is something we're looking at. So I think we have to look at both and see which of them kind of gives the best bang for the buck for customers in terms of observability.
Okay. And then the second question always comes: do get X-Ray, and then secondly, cross account. So can the scheduler be used to invoke an API of AWS service in cross account?
Think about that. Right now you have to give a role. So I would say no. So for most APIs, no. For specific APIs, yes. So the role that you provide has to be in the account of the caller. So if you're providing a role, the role has to be in account of the caller. But what you can do for specific services that support resource-based policies is, if I have an SQS queue, I can basically set the resource-based policy to say, I want this specific role in another account to have access to it. So that way you can have cross-account access that way for specific things,
Okay.
for specific services. I think SQS has resource-based policies. I believe Lambda does too as well. But that's something I think we can work with. We can talk to the doc team to see how we can make that a bit clearer for customers, that they can have cross-account access, but only for specific services. And this is how you could do it for these specific services. But I'm also just curious the use case for cross-account. I don't know which target you're trying to hit as well. So
yeah, so it depends on the resource policies and what they're able to what they're able to allow. And then also, yeah, thanks Mark for joining us via YouTube as well. Are they available as a construct for events within SAM?
So we do have,
yeah.
So we have a scheduled V2 resource now. So previously we had scheduled resource in SAM, but now we have a scheduled V2 resource that exists right now. So you should be able to use scheduled V2, which should basically generate an EventBridge scheduler rule. Not rule, sorry. EventBridge scheduler schedule.
Okay. And then I suppose one of the other questions which comes up as well, oh, that was the X-ray one, sorry, my questions jumped. It's from Pawan Pandey, thanks for joining us. What would be the architecture to do it with EventBridge, given all users will schedule it using the SaaS UI? And I sort of want to take a take on this. Is some people are thinking, well, we've got the EventBridge and the event buses, and we've now got EventBridge Scheduler. Sort of what is interaction? What's the difference? I mean, I've got a view on that, but I'd like to sort of hear your thoughts of how should customers think about the scheduler as it's sort of mentioned as part of EventBridge, but it's not really using the event bus.
I'll think about them depending on your use case. So if your use case is I want to schedule something to fire recurring basis or one time, just any scheduling need you have, you want to use the EventBridge scheduler. Technically, we looked at it and we're like, the reason we kind of put it under the EventBridge brand was primarily because of EventBridge already has scheduled rules. We want to kind of have one central place for customers to just have both. Eventually, I think we're also looking at how we can make the integration and the console a bit better between people that already have scheduled rules today, making it easy for them to migrate over to EventBridge Scheduler. So that's that. So I think it depends on your use case. So if your use case is purely like event-driven architecture, I want events flowing and I want to set a rule, and then there's a target on a bus, you would use EventBridge with an event bus and you set up a rule. Or if you want something with scheduling, you want to use EventBridge Scheduler. And I think our documentation is, if you look at the documentation for creating scheduled rules now, it basically recommends that you should be using EventBridge Scheduler for creating your scheduled events. And our free tier is pretty generous. I think it's 14 million. So that should fit any case for people kind of moving over.
Yeah, I saw that 14 million. Yeah, I have just put a link in the chat for the EventBridge Scheduler for the user guide and also the API reference I will stick in shortly. Yeah, just one of the other comments on the sort of EventBridge branding, I think. I mean, EventBridge started obviously as the awesome event bus, and that had sort of grew out of CloudWatch events. But I mean, if you think of EventBridge as sort of more of a umbrella of ways that you can build event-driven architectures, we obviously know and love the first one being the event router, the event bus, where you can route events between AWS services, your own custom events, and from the integration with SaaS partners, which is super useful. So that's on the inbound, and then using API destinations to send an event literally to any API endpoint on the internet. That is super useful. Here's now another sort of part, I suppose, of the family is the scheduler. Well, you know, lots of things being asynchronous and needing to run on a schedule. Event-driven applications often need to do stuff on a schedule, and so there is it's nice to have that sort of link within the same family. And you know, there are going to be more things coming out in the future which are going to use the EventBridge family name, I suppose, as well, with some sort of more applications. But it's all this idea of building event-driven architectures and building event-driven applications are super powerful to be able to scale up your services and have producers and consumers be able to talk to each other, but have this without this coupling. And so, yeah, you know, and EventBridge is going to be at the forefront of doing that. And also, you know, we love taking your feedback. So if you do have questions, comments, or ideas of what EventBridge can do and how it could, you know, branch out to help solve your particular application needs, you know, please let us know. We love to hear what you want, and we can, you know, hopefully work towards things that are going to help you out. So I have done the one with the one link, and then I've just posted the API reference.
And just one thing to add to that question with the SaaS UI, assuming the question was primarily on how do I build a SaaS application that has scheduling on it. I think API reference kind of give you a very good context on what you would what you would need, essentially our APIs. And again, the API limits, because our default limits are soft limits, are not high enough. Feel free to reach out to support or the EventBridge Scheduler team directly, and we'll kind of work with you in terms of how we can kind of make sure we have the limits, make sure our API limits can support your use case. Because the team has had experience kind of maintaining and building high throughput scheduling for many AWS use cases. So we think we should be able to support most, if not all, customer kind of requests, if not immediately, but soon after, in terms of like the API limits. So for SaaS applications, I think we're expecting, as Julian said earlier, customers to interact with our API. The SaaS, if you're building your SaaS UI behind the scenes, you're calling create, updates, delete, schedule, and exposing that. So just being a proxy to the EventBridge Scheduler API.
Yeah, there was a question about. Oh, I've just jumped to the wrong tab. There was a question about. Oh, the second link is broken, Mark. Thank you. I will have a look at that and I will post that shortly. It's probably my copy and paste. And yeah, any tentative timelines of expanding to other regions? I am literally looking that up to see what regions there were.
Right now we're in 9 regions: ID, CMH, PDX, Dub, SIN, SID.
So lots of all the big kind of regions. Obviously, there'd be work to spread them out. So
we'll have more details on it. Yeah, we'll have more details on the timeline. I think right now we're just looking. We'll have more details on the timeline in the coming month or two in terms of region expansion. So right now we don't have like a concrete timeline yet. I think we'll have something more detailed over the coming months. So
cool. Yeah, I see that link. I put a colon at the end. So let me sort that one out. So there, Mark, your second link is done over there. Then Thomas, yeah, interesting question. If events are delivered at least once, does it mean there will be 2 different execution IDs, or there will be 2 target invocations but with the same scheduler execution ID?
Yeah, it will be 2 target invocations with the same scheduler execution ID. So the ID will be unique.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, so this is when I was talking about the idempotency earlier. This is exactly what you're going to be able to use and be able to check whether your a database record and API has already received the event with the execution ID, and then you know to ignore that. Cool. So are we holding thumbs and hoping that our queue is drained? With our one-time schedule. With our one-time schedule.
The one-time schedule. Should be drained. Yeah. Anybody see that? Down to 0.
Yes, we can. Nothing in there.
And then we have a ton of messages here. No, this is this is a separate queue I was testing. So I actually want to also show the DLQ use case. Let me see if my screen is sharing properly. Let's go back to EventBridge. Let's just go back. We can actually search scheduler directly. I don't know if this is. So let's create a schedule that's pointing to a queue that doesn't exist. So it's like a broken schedule. Let's make this fire every 2 minutes as well, like a minute maybe. It's off. And let's also point to SQS here. Doesn't really matter the payload because it's scheduled. This doesn't exist. Actually, let me see if we can actually override this. Okay. The one thing with our experience here is so good that I can't actually put a non-existent schedule. Actually, let me put something that I'll actually delete. So let's call it this. And let's go here. Here. Schedule. So old test schedule. I'm going to go over and delete that schedule in a separate tab. So I think in 2 minutes or so, we should see a message in DLQ telling us why that schedule was not delivered on time.
Perfect. Yeah, just some of the sort of security things that people always talk about, which are important for this. And I mean, it's always good to know that encryption at rest, you can either use the AWS KMS key or your customer key to encrypt the things that are happening in the service. And also there are also in transit, all the things with EventBridge Scheduler are also encrypted. I have just spotted we have got Phil, and Phil, hi, you've joined onto this stream. Phil is the product manager for EventBridge Scheduler and was only be able to join us lately. Just so you know, Cian has been doing a phenomenal job walking us all through EventBridge Scheduler, so we're happy to have him.
I'm not surprised. He's fantastic.
Yeah, Phil, no, I mean, Cian's been through most of the kind of stuff and use cases and everything. As being the sort of product manager for this, what are your sort of highlights and excitement about the service that you'd like to share? And I know I've literally just added you on and put you on the spot. If you need a minute to breathe, that's also fine as well.
No, it's a great question. I actually was...
Sorry, your mic went out, Bill.
Yeah, it's an interesting mic.
I think you still, yeah.
It's that microphone seems to always play finicky switching. But yes, actually, I'm very excited about this launch. We just got off a call with a number of customers, actually, which is why I was tardy. So apologies for that. Definitely, I see a lot of value that we're providing for our customers, especially in regards to scale, the volume of schedules that we can provide, as well as the targets. Being able to really leverage the SDK integrations that Step Functions uses is, I think, a big win for a lot of our customers that are looking to schedule across the AWS multitude of services that we have, and to do so very easily. And I think that's the big part, is being able to do it in a nice, easy manner for them. So definitely looking forward to also the new use cases are going to pop up that we hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, have there been any so far that as I know it's only been released for a few days, but have any customers been knocking on your door and going, "Oh, hang on, have you thought about this?" You're like, "Well, that's interesting. Let's try that."
The one I saw was that someone brought up was the fault injection. Scheduling fault injection was pretty interesting. I was kind of surprised to see that surface. But I'm sure over the next few weeks, we'll definitely have more opportunity to see the new ways that our customers and their imagination and creativity are going to supply.
Cool, excellent. Yeah, Cian, I know you were sort of in the middle of showing us something, and then I did rudely interrupt you. Sorry about that, but we had to have Phil talk about his service. So.
But yeah, actually, I think one thing you brought up with KMS, I actually didn't show, is obviously you could also set your KMS key, something like that here, customize encryption settings. So by default, things are encrypted at rest using our AWS own keys, and you can kind of specify your own key here. This link, creating your own key, should take you to like the KMS console where you can create your key and then specify the key here to use. So I think that just expanding on what you said earlier with encryption. Let me see the schedule I created for the broken schedule. I see. So I did not set a DLQ on this one. I should set that. Always set a DLQ. We should probably have a best practices in our docs. We're always setting it.
I think I'm trying to think of the service. I don't know if it's AWS Config or Trusted Advisor actually does tell you for a whole bunch of services when you don't have DLQs added. I think it's AWS Config. And so, yeah, those you can, if there aren't AWS rules for that already, you can very simply add your own rules. So AWS Config is actually a super useful service to be able to sort of have a look at your serverless applications and to be able to, find these missing things. And because they can also, funny enough, run on a schedule, you can create those rules once and have them look at resources in your account and yeah, just pop up if things like DLQs aren't added to Lambda functions as well, or SQS queues in this example.
Yes, I think in a minute it should show. I think in the meantime, I actually would show. Let me actually move over to the metrics. It's something a few customers have asked about that we need to kind of beef up our documentation on. I think we're working on that. Is metrics. You can actually monitor, in addition to DLQ, you can actually monitor how things are doing. Like invocations are getting sent in time. So I'll kind of go over.
Yeah, just while those metrics are popping up, Gunsar says, apologies if it's been asked already. It hasn't, but anyway, you're welcome to ask. Can we already use the scheduler in CDK? My initial answer would be yes, because anything that can be done in CloudFormation and CDK is going to generate CloudFormation should be fine. I don't know if you need to update your CDK to for that to happen, but yeah, because EventBridge Scheduler is part of CloudFormation, anything with SAM or CDK should just be able to get that as well. And just to know, internally, people are doing a lot of work to be able to ensure that we get day one support for as many services as possible. So CloudFormation plus, by extension, SAM and CDK. I know customers were saying before that sometimes there was a lag. That is closed for many situations. So yeah, I think in this case, I can be confident to say CloudFormation they got you for CloudFormation.
We have CloudFormation, but the bad news is we don't have CDK yet. I think CDK okay. There's a bit of a lag. I think it takes about a week.
Yeah, but it's CDK. Cool. So yes, CloudFormation will be there, but CDK will be updated, within the week. So that's pretty good.
But we do have SAM, so we have SAM now and CloudFormation. Yeah. CDK should show up within a week.
Okay.
And I think we'll be looking to see how we can, because CDK has 2 levels of constructs. We have the more advanced, simplified constructs. Yeah. So those will take a bit more time versus just the regular vanilla CDK constructs that just wrap around CloudFormation.
Yeah. And also another interesting point for some other third-party tools who have a much easier way now to update their integrations with AWS with the Cloud API. So the Cloud API is a sort of simplified API across all AWS services, which sort of does CRUD actions, and so you'll find third-party tools also update against with new AWS services really quickly, because they can just target the Cloud API, which is often much simpler for them than having to understand the nuances of different APIs, which obviously are going to be different because they do different services. And so yeah, that's also if you're using third-party tools, hopefully those integrations also happen much quicker. So metrics, yes.
So metrics. So here key metrics we have essentially for the scheduler is you could kind of per group, you could basically see the invocation attempt count. So we can see here like steadily, let me actually make this graph. So you can see maybe the sum of invocations that have been sent for a specific time period for a schedule group. So right now we don't have per schedule, but we have for a schedule group, you can kind of see things are flowing, things getting sent. Another important metric is drop. So basically invocation was dropped. So it looks like one thing was dropped around 6:14, so 2:14. Let me make this time, not UTC, local time zone. Because nobody likes doing conversions. Well, you can see here like 8 things were dropped at this time period, so something was misconfigured. And you could also see metrics on target error count. So error count here means like there's an error on the target with delivery. Invocations failed to be sent to the DLQ. So invocations failed to be sent to the invocations are not delivered to the DLQ because of DLQ is configured incorrectly. You would see that here. Same thing here. You could see any type of reason, for any reason, invocations were not sent to the DLQ. And yeah, for this one, you can see the invocation. So this was the schedule group we created. There was an invocation attempt here. Now it's just the one-time schedule. So the important metrics here, you can see things are getting delivered. You can use this metric. Things are going wrong. You could use the invocation drop count metric. And you could see the invocation getting dropped is due to errors for the targets. So this will kind of give you high-level understanding of if something is going wrong, maybe slightly an idea of why things are going wrong, but the DLQ tell you clearly why things are going wrong. So you could basically set alarms on invocation drop counts to see if things are failing or not getting delivered. You could set alarms on invocation attempt counts, meaning if you always expect, if you have a lot of recurring schedules and you expect something to be firing or running or getting delivered and it's not, you could set an alarm that fires if nothing is getting emitted for this metric. I can set an alarm that fires if something gets emitted for this metric specifically. So these are kind of the two key metrics you can kind of use for monitoring this first two at the top. And this will tell you if something gets filled, something really bad is happening here if stuff is not getting to DLQ, because DLQ is basically your, I won't say your last line of defense, but it's a key part for kind of debugging. So you want to make sure that it's configured correctly. So you want to set an alarm of this too.
Excellent. Well, our time is up, but just before, sort of one last question, which I like to ask people is, I know we're talking about the amazing service and it's all unicorns and rainbows, but even Phil or Cian, what would be use cases where maybe people shouldn't consider EventBridge Scheduler yet, or are there any sort of cautionary things to mention? And if there's not, that's also fine. I mean, this is a scheduler, so.
Yeah, for scheduling, I think, yeah, any use case you want to have for scheduling. I think the one thing we don't support today, I'll open the feedback, is because our schedules are invoking our specific targets, we don't support read-only targets right now, because they're like, once you read the input, once you kind of read from the target, there's nothing you can kind of do with it. So it's kind of primarily useless. But if there's a use case for that, it's something we can basically support easily. It's just a matter of like, if you're scheduling something that reads, that gets the queue name for a particular queue, there is nothing you can do with the response on the schedule. So typically, for those, you probably want to wrap that in a state machine to kind of get to for the next step to follow. So I think those would be the use cases where we don't support because we don't see really any need for it, but obviously open to kind of feedback on it. I think outside that, yeah, if you have any high throughput case for scheduling, low or high, you should use an EventBridge Scheduler. I don't know if Phil wants to add anything on that.
No, I got pretty much a very similar view on it as well. In terms of like where the use case doesn't fit for a scheduler, if you are going to inevitably schedule an invocation of a target, low scale, high scale, it meets both parameters. The flexibility of it all is pretty high and phenomenal. So at the moment, I think Shane kind of hit the nail on the head in regards to if you're looking to hit a read-only schedule, read-only API, that would be kind of you're hitting at an endpoint there. That's kind of at its end, for lack of a better term, with what you're pulling from.
Cool. No, well, thanks for all the updates. And yeah, just quickly, before we say goodbye, up next week, it's pre-invent. It's a week just before reInvent. So I will be the host and we will have a cast of, well, not everybody, but a lot of people talking about all the cool things that are going on at reInvent, from community things to people talking about different talks and workshops and breakout sessions and maybe some parties and who knows what's going on at reInvent. We'll have a motley crew of people getting up to date. We'll also be looking at some of the cool announcements as well that have been coming out beforehand. So yeah, make a date for next week, same time, same place for serverless office hours. Also remember, we've got the serverless snippets collection, we've got serverless workflows connection, and obviously the serverless patterns collection, infrastructure as code templates that you can just grab directly off the website and use in your applications. I'm sure there are people working feverishly to add some examples for EventBridge Scheduler. So yeah, that'll be happening very, very soon. And of course, serverlessland.com for all things related to serverless on AWS. This is your best spot to have a look. But thanks so much for joining us this week, Cian, and thanks so much, Phil, for coming on and giving us some of your insights. Really appreciate having you both on, and yeah, thanks for your time, and we will see you next week for serverless office hours. Goodbye.